you want, when you're done, you can just stick it in here and I'll,
Yep.
I'll take care of it, okay?
Caleb, did you need me to pull up my Zoom again?
Nope.
It's up? I'm gonna be having it on Zoom, Facebook Live, and then I'm gonna put it up on YouTube afterwards.
Let's see. This will look. If I'm careful, I can use my mouse like a PowerPoint advancer got repurposed as a cat toy. And it's sitting on a shelf at home. I probably could put it back in my laptop bag. He's decided he's done with the little laser chasing laser dots.
Oh, really?
He'd rather chase us. It just keeps cycling like it's detecting and undetecting.
Yeah.
There we go.
Took your touch.
Sometimes that's all it takes. You can do the same thing 4 times and it'll never do it. Okay.
And you said you need me kind of to this need us when we're talking
Yeah,
right
I
to this
don't-
side of the,
I want them to be able to see it too, right? But
well, here, what works with both?
yeah, that'll work. Yeah. You can even be up there.
There's your spot.
All right, thank you.
All right, you're good to go.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here both in person and online. My name is Kennedy Blakley, and I am the Omega Communications Manager. We are holding this meeting here at the Harrison County Pasco-Rich Public Library to discuss the broadband feasibility study being conducted by Omega with the Reid Consulting Group. And the purpose of this study was really to find out where within the Omega region, which areas did have access to good broadband and which areas did not. So Sean and Tom Reid and his team have been working tirelessly on that for us. Our study is going to be complete here next month, but we cannot stress enough how important access to broadband is on a regional stage. Nowadays it has become just as important as any other utility. So if you don't have broadband, it's very, very dire straits. So in order for the region to remain competitive on a state and national stage, we want to make sure that we do get access to broadband. And yeah, so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and introduce Mr. Sean O'Malley with the Reid Consulting Group, and he's going to tell us a little bit more.
Thanks, Kennedy. So this would not be possible without our partners who have provided funding for this. The Omega District has been instrumental in it. We've also been working with the other development districts in the region, Buckeye Hills, OVRDC, and Eastgate. We also have quite a few other partners across the state who have contributed either funding or in kind to make this happen. Without these folks, this would not be possible. We really appreciate it.
Yes, and my apologies, I forgot to mention Omega was able to have the study conducted through funding sourced from the EDA CARES Act. So my apologies, Sean.
Oh, no worries. Got to give credit where credit is due.
Absolutely.
Apologies for the Bengals reference. Joey Burrow is a hometown boy for me. I know we're closer to Pittsburgh and Cleveland over here. But we really do need to strategize and position ourselves for a win for our region. First off, we have to identify where broadband needs to go, and then prioritize which of those areas we want to focus on.
Where are all our neighbors?
Once we've done that, we want to figure out how we secure funding for it, and then track that funding and enforce it. Make sure that the providers who receive the funding actually do the work. As you'll see later in this presentation, that has not always been the case in the past. And if you participated in our first round of broadband profiles, some of this will sound familiar. I don't want to skip over too much because we'll have folks coming in who are brand new to this, and I don't want them to miss out on the context. So I'll be starting at the statewide level. This is the view of broadband availability in Ohio. The dark red is below 10 megabits per second. The orange is below 25.3. Both of those speeds are considered unserved by the FCC. The yellow and the light green are also now considered underserved. They are slower than 100 megabits. So by the new Infrastructure Act rules, those areas are considered underserved. So essentially it's almost the whole state. You just see there's little dark patches. You see them pretty well in Cincinnati and Dayton area. Columbus has some, Cleveland's got some, Akron, Canton area. And if you zoomed in on some of the smaller cities, you'd be able to see some little blotches of fast coverage there as well. But for the most part, there's a lot of need in the state. And this is not just based on like our best guess. This is based on over 9 million consumer speed test results. The state was wise enough to license data from a company called Ookla. They are the biggest company who do speed tests. If you Google speed test, they're who you're going to get usually. And we were able to combine that with other federal and state sources of data to be able to get this map put together. It is still worth doing the speed tests, so we encourage people to still take them. As things move forward, as funding gets handed out and work starts to be done, it will be really useful to be able to look at speed test results and see, yes, areas are starting to light up, they're starting to turn green. You can find the instructions for that at connectingappalachia.org. It's pretty simple. So what we want to look at with the numbers on these findings here are these unserved areas. So you're looking at almost 2/3 of the state's populated acreage, and about 800,000 households do not have the minimum level of broadband that the FCC considers, the 25 megabit down, 3 megabit up. If you have to ask the FCC themselves, they say that there's only 200,000 households. They have since admitted that their maps are wrong and that that's a low number. On the high end, Microsoft thinks there's close to 2 million households that are without broadband. So why is this problem here? It really comes down to population density. When you're in a city, you'll have 1,500 households per square mile. Columbus is a good example of that. Even when you go down to a smaller city like McConnellsville, they're still pushing 500 households per square mile. That is plenty of space for a provider to be able to come in and run fiber and make a profit, because they've got a lot of potential customers. They'll be able to get enough of a subscription rate that they can make their money back. The challenge comes when you get into what we like to call the rural expanse. I live in the rural expanse myself, so I have firsthand experience of this. All of Meigs County, for example, is less than 2% of the density of Columbus. And when you get into some of the smaller townships, you're getting down below even 10 households per square mile sometimes. And that's just not enough market share available for an internet provider to come in and install fiber just with their own funds, because they won't make the money back. There just won't be enough subscribers. This isn't a new problem. It's been almost a century. Back in the Depression era, we had the Communications Act in 1934. All people in the United States shall have access to rapid, efficient, nationwide communication service with adequate facilities at reasonable charges. Now, they were talking about phone lines back then, good old landlines, but that wording applies just as well to broadband today. And in fact, since 1990, there's been $100 billion of this fund that was established back then, given from the FCC to the telecommunications companies, supposedly to fix this problem. It's not fixed yet, obviously. I like to use a road analogy. If you stop maintaining your roads for a couple of years, you're going to get potholes. If you quit maintaining them for 5 or 6 years, you're going to get car eaters of potholes. If you abandon those roads for a couple of decades, you're going back to a Jeep track or a goat path. Unfortunately, that's what happened with our broadband infrastructure in Appalachia. About 50 years ago, half century, some of that Communications Act money was used to install a bunch of really nice copper cabling all through our region to carry landline telephones. It also can carry broadband. If you have DSL or you know someone who has DSL, their broadband is going over those copper cables. The problem is copper only lasts about 25 to 30 years, and then you have to replace it or do a lot of maintenance on it. And because of the fact that everyone's going to cell phones now, not as many people are buying landlines, or they're giving up their landlines, and things like fiber optic and cable TV have come along as far as other ways to get broadband, the companies who own this copper have just said, we're done, we're not gonna work on it. So those cables are still 50 years old now, so 20 plus years beyond when you'd expect them to stop working well. And that is the case. If you still have a landline out in a rural area, you probably have a lot of outages. To stick with the road metaphor for a minute, if you're gonna upgrade things, if you're gonna put a new highway in, you need to meet some minimum specifications. When it comes to pavement, it's a book like this thick, if you printed it out, where they talk about all of the different layers you have to lay down, what kind of materials they are, how thick they can be, what kind of binders you put in them. You know, you can't just say, oh yeah, we're gonna plow things over and dump some asphalt and we're good. Unfortunately, broadband kind of does that. Many of the broadband funding programs just say, here's a target speed. We don't care how you meet it, just meet it. That can be okay in the short term, but it can be a problem when you're looking on having something that's gonna last for multiple decades. To give you some perspective on why this matters, back in 1990 the web was invented, and pretty much every 10 years since then, bandwidth demand has gone up tenfold. So it was about 100K back on the little modems that you used to have on your desk that would make the little shrieking noises when you connect to the internet back in 1990. By 2000, well-served area could expect a megabit connection. By 2010, which is when Zoom was started as a company, it was up to 10 megabits per second in a well-served area. That number I keep saying about 25 megabits as being like the FCC minimum for broadband, that was relevant in 2012. That was what you could expect if you were in a well-served area. Today, it's around 100 megabits per second. Where are we going in the future? Nobody knows for sure, but I'm pretty sure this trend is going to continue. You're already seeing a lot of things that would have even been unimaginable just in the years before the pandemic are now normal. Working from home, remote school, telehealth. Already virtual reality is becoming a really popular thing for trainings and simulations. So I'm guessing that trend is going to continue. And it's real easy to think, you can already see a gigabit. There are a lot of places where you can get a gigabit plan now, and a lot of people subscribe at that level. Last I checked, some of the cable companies were even starting to offer 2 gigabit service. So it's pretty easy to imagine hitting 10 gigabits, possibly even 100 gigabits within the next several decades. As far as what our current technologies are, DSL, fixed wireless, and satellite all top out at about 100 megabits. So they're good for now. If you can get a good connection with one of those technologies, you would be considered well served right now. Cable modems top out on average about a gigabit per second for download. Like I said, some of the cable companies now have figured out how to squeeze another gigabit out, so they're getting 2 gigabits download. They're limited by upload though. So if you're doing things like Zoom where you're having to send out video as well as consume it, cable modems run into trouble because even those 2 gig plans might only have an upload speed of maybe 10 or 20 megabits. The only thing that really works if you're talking about all the way out through 2040, 2050 is fiber optic. That can hold up. Right now there are fiber optic networks that are running at 100 gigabits per second. So that technology can handle future demand right now without having any changes. And this is infrastructure. It's like putting in a sewer system. You don't want to go back and dig people's yards up again 5 years from now because the pipes you put in weren't big enough. So we recommend multi-decade planning. And because of supply chain issues and just the fact that installing fiber is a big project, we suggest starting a few years ahead for your fiber planning, so like 2025 through 2055. That doesn't mean you should ignore the short term. There are a lot of folks who are in need right now, and there are technologies that can be deployed quickly that you can get out there right away to help folks in the meantime. As an example, over in Coshocton County, they used $5 million of their ARPA funds to entice a wireless provider called Ohio TT to come in and serve a good portion of their county. They're going to build 11 new towers, and they're going to add antennas to 10 existing structures, and they're going to have coverage for 15,000 households approximately. If you look at that heat map on there, like the red is like the best signal, and then as you get into the greens and the lighter greens, it's not as good, but it's still pretty good coverage throughout areas that are unserved there. And they'll have packages that start at 25 megabits and go up to 100 megabits. It's not the same as fiber, but it's a really good option, and it's something that can be set up. Like the first tower has already gone live, I think. So like they're actually able to roll this stuff out quickly, and people will have an option immediately, and then it's a competitive option too. If you have somebody like Charter or Comcast wanting to come in and do fiber, they're gonna have to make sure they do it right, because they've got an active competitor in the market who has a compelling alternative that people can go to. I'm talking a lot about fiber optic. I really do believe that's the best way to do a network if you're gonna do long term. Not all fiber is the same. It gets pretty pricey. One of the aspects of the cost is getting the utility poles ready to have fiber optic hung from it. That can range from $30,000 to about $60,000 a mile for this. On top of that, then you have to actually buy the cable and pay the labor to install it. That's another $30,000 to $40,000 a mile, and that may go up now that we have inflation kicking in pretty heavily. So in total, you're looking at somewhere between $64,000 and $100,000 per mile to run fiber. You can do this cheaper. When we quote these numbers, we are always talking about building a network that is going to last for 30 to 40 years, because fiber optic itself holds up really well. It's low maintenance. So you want whatever you build today, you don't want to have to build it again. So we're building in enough capacity with what we call high strand count cables. These are fat cables that can have up to like a couple of hundred strands of fiber in them. That has enough capacity to be able to have a strand for each household, as well as if cell companies want to start building towers, you need fiber for that. So if you have a good solid network with a lot of capacity, that makes it more likely that the cell companies will be willing to come in and upgrade their towers or add more. And it just builds in some extra headroom if you have more demand come in. Not just the speeds, where I was saying the things people are doing are making the speeds go up, but also, it's funny, when you have broadband in an area, people want to live there, or people stop leaving. Like we have had for decades in Eastern Appalachia, where the kids move away. You know, like they grow up in a small town, and then they're like, I can't work here, I gotta move to the city. Well, when you have broadband, it becomes possible, especially now post-pandemic. You can work from home. You can have a really good job prospect and not have to leave where you grew up. If that happens, and then the word gets out that a really good place to live like our region has the infrastructure to be able to work remotely, you're going to see population come back up. And when that happens, if you built a really cheap fiber network with just what they call inexpensive drop cables to run all of your wiring, you're going to run out of capacity, and then you'll have the same problem we have now. We also recommend armored cable. Squirrels love fiber optic cable. They love to chew on it. They love it even more than power lines, maybe because they don't die when they bite into it. But there are special cable that actually has like 2 layers in it. So the squirrel chews through the outside, it hits a metal sheath, it doesn't like that, it stops. Water could get in, but then there's another sheath on the inside that protects the cable from the water, so it'll hold up to that. And we're assuming that you're putting this on utility poles. Around here, there's a lot of bedrock fairly close to the surface. So if you were going to try to bury all of your internet infrastructure, you'd run into a lot of rock, and you'd have to either use fancy boring machines, or you'd have to run up onto a utility pole temporarily and then back into the ground again. And that gets expensive really quickly. If you go underground around here, we estimate it's probably adding $10,000 to $50,000 a mile. And to give you a sense why this is so expensive, this is a typical electrical pole setup. You see these all the time when you're driving around. So those top lines, those carry the high voltage. You got a transformer in here to convert it down, step it down for the stuff that goes into the house, and then you have your distribution lines there at the secondary level. And then down here at the bottom is where your communications cables are. You can always recognize them because they have these little black splice cases on them. And you have to maintain specific clearances. Like there has to be a certain number of feet between the communications cables and the power space, so that you don't have to worry about shutting the power off when somebody's working on those communication lines, and you don't have to worry about technicians getting killed working up there. You also have to have clearance with the ground as well. And in our area, it's fine if you're out in flat farm country, but in our area, you have hills. And when you add another line onto the bottom of that pole, a lot of times it kills your clearance, and so you end up having to put up taller poles to be able to hold that new line. Sometimes too, the poles are just old, and fiber optic is not the heaviest stuff in the world. It's actually fairly lightweight, but what you have to think about is when the wind blows, it pushes on that cable, and in the winter you get an ice storm, that lightweight cable gets real heavy all of a sudden. And so when you add another set of ice and wind load to that, some of those old poles, there's a risk they'll break. And so then you end up having to pay the utility company to put a new pole in, or at least share the cost of it. So now to zoom in on our region, this is the Omega District. You can see that there is a lot of unserved area here. Again, the dark red is the worst, that's below 10 megabits per second. The orange is below 25. Then we've got the yellows and greens going in again into the underserved areas. Looking at Harrison County, you've got a pretty good chunk there. Harrison is actually in a decent place in terms of having what they call middle mile fiber. That's what those blue lines are. And then this little pink here, any places where the pink is are places that we recommend, if funding comes available to install more middle mile, that should go there, because that will join these little dead ends up to other parts of the network so that you've got some redundancy and more capacity. There is part of the Infrastructure Act that's coming out. There is a specific grant program just for middle mile. And that's a bit of an industry term, so if you're not familiar with all the jargon with broadband, middle mile literally sits in the middle, in between like the larger internet and then the home offices of the internet providers and the neighborhoods where you'd want to serve them. And then what they call last mile is the stuff that goes from this middle mile fiber out here into the areas where you would be reaching people's individual houses and buildings. If you don't have middle mile, you can't do last mile, but it's not enough just to put middle mile in. It's like part of a puzzle. Here's single color for everything that's unserved in the orange, just to make it easier to see. This blue is territory that Charter Communications won from the feds. They did not win any territory in Harrison County, so this won't be relevant specifically here. But those areas are likely to get served in the next 2 years. Charter is already doing some work in Guernsey that we're aware of. Good news for Harrison. South Central Power won a huge grant from the state, the Ohio Residential Broadband Expansion Grant Program, or BEG, you could call it, because government folks always love their acronyms. But they won funding to serve fiber to the home for all of their customers. Everybody in there. So that's South Central Power's, this dark purple. This is South Central Power's Eastern Territory. So they're planning on, if they end up approving this, their board meets in a few weeks to decide if they want to commit to this and accept the grant. I think they probably will, but I don't want to count chickens until the eggs have hatched. That will be a very large chunk of Harrison County that gets served with high quality, reasonably priced fiber optic broadband. Give you a little bit of a zoom in on that. It's 1,661 addresses. There are also a couple other providers. Comcast and Frontier supposedly received funding to serve 42 and 37 households. We don't know, this might change because there's a process still involved where providers can challenge the addresses and say, oh, I already served that. Or Broadband Ohio, the agency that manages this grant, just looks at it and said, well, wait a minute, we handed out a grant to someone else for here, so no one else can have a grant for that in this round. So these numbers could change. But that's just to give you a sense of the scope of it. This is just a summary of the region, and you can see South Central Power was the big winner in Harrison. Comcast and Frontier very far second and third. So what are the next steps here? Well, as I said, identify, prioritize, and fund. I'll show you in a moment the detailed broadband profile for Harrison County that you can use to get funding from all these sources. So we're going to have Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. That's the thing they call RDOF from the FCC. There is going to be a second round of that. We're hearing that they may radically revise how that program works so that it works better, because the funding they awarded in their first round did not go over real well. USDA is getting into the broadband business. Appalachian Regional Commission has got grants available through their POWER program as well as through the Distressed Counties program. Broadband Ohio is going to have plenty of money. They gave away $250 million in this first round. They're not done. There's probably going to be most of that money from the NTIA that's coming in from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that $1 to $1.5 billion that we expect Ohio is going to get. That's going to go up through Broadband Ohio. So for some reason the Treasury Department is in the broadband business. Their money is going to filter through Broadband Ohio as well. that's a good news. We've worked closely with Broadband Ohio, and we were really impressed with them. Peter Voderberg knows his stuff, and he cares about this issue. I have never seen a government agency get up and running so quickly. House Bill 2, the law that established this fund, passed. 2 weeks later, they had a website up and they were soliciting grant applications from internet providers. And they have stuck to their deadlines as far as when they were gonna make their decisions, when they were gonna let people know who had won. I'm impressed with them, and they are going address by address. If you apply, you have to give a list of every single address that you intend to serve, and then I'm assuming they're gonna come back later and say, okay, show us that you served those addresses. Unlike the FCC with some of their previous programs where you could just give them write a report and say, yes, we installed this stuff, and then there's no verification. So this is a good time. The situation is dire. There's a lot of people who need internet out there, but I feel optimistic about this. To give you an example of the prioritizing and planning process, Carroll County did this for an ARC Power grant. They don't know if they're gonna get it. They've applied. The decision will come in fall. But they decided to take some of their ARPA funds, which is the COVID relief money that was given to the counties and the townships, and contribute that along with a private partner, in this case Charter Communications, the big cable company, they're called Spectrum. So Carroll County kicked in a little over $1 million. Charter agreed to kick in over 800,000, and then they're asking the ARC, Appalachian Regional Commission, to give them $2 million for a total of just under $4 million, and they will install 86 miles of fiber optic, serve 384 households and 53 businesses, and you can see it's in these highlighted areas with the pink. Again, this is a really good way, another good way to use if you have county and township funds available, is to use them to sweeten a deal to get an internet provider to come in and serve one of these areas that is not being covered by something else. At this point, I want to switch in and do a quick zoom in on Harrison County itself. And the profile I'm going to show you, you can get it online either from the Omega District's website, omegadistrict.org, or you can go to connectingappalachia.org. Those are available. Stop by slideshow here.
I think it's funny that this is all online when people can't get online.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I was just thinking the same
Uh-huh.
thing.
Yeah, it's like the irony of tech support. My email doesn't work. Okay, send us an email and we'll help you.
Yeah.
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 We've been working, see if we get the HDMI source to come back on. We've been working to do surveys for people for broadband access, and we've been reaching out to places like libraries to be able to make paper copies available, because some people just don't have access at home, and we want to know that and still be able to get their feedback. Let's try selecting source again. Come on, you can do it. Maybe not. It just doesn't.
Try unplugging it,
Like,
plug it right back in there.
if it doesn't, I will just narrate this. Yay.
There we go.
Yes.
All right.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and zoom this out so that let's see more of the page. So this first page in the broadband profile has a zoomed in version of the county's speed map with all of the speeds in there so that you can see where the served and unserved locations are. It's also got that open middle mile superimposed on there, but only the stuff that actually exists. We didn't draw in the proposed sections on there. But you can see you've got a lot of, 94% of your populated area is not served. 2/3 of your households. That's a lot. So to give another perspective on this, all of these maps here, when there's these single colors, all of the colored stuff is the unserved, and the white is anything that's served. So we just blanked that out to make it easier to look at. So all the dots on here are business locations. And the size of those dots varies based on the amount of demand that we expect them to have for broadband. We got this information through Dun & Bradstreet. They provide information on all the business locations in the county, and then how many employees they have and what industry sector they are. So the more employees you have, the bigger your dot's gonna be. For a business that has the same number of employees, the dot will be bigger based on your industry. So like healthcare, education, IT, banking, those are really high consumers of broadband. Whereas things like hunting cabins and contractors, mining, things like that, those tend to be lower on the scale, but they still need broadband. But they're not gonna need as much because a lot of their workers are out in the field. But essentially we plotted that on the county, and you can see that there are clusters of businesses in the well-served areas. You would kind of expect that. But there are also quite a few clusters out there where you have businesses located in areas that do not have good broadband. This, we think, is a really good planning tool. If you're looking for areas to prioritize, you can superimpose your residential information with your business information and say, hey, we can get a better bang for the buck if we focus in a particular location where there are unserved businesses as well as unserved residential units. Or it could be like, it might only be a handful of businesses, but they're big demand. Speaking of residential, here's what it looks like for the residential layout. Now this is not all 8,700 households. We can't draw them that well at this resolution, but it's sort of a hybrid heat map designed to show you the patterns of where the houses are built. And in a document like this, you have to kind of scroll back and forth, and you say, so like over here, we've got some businesses down in here. Let's take a look in this section. So yeah, you've got a decent amount of population density down there too. So that might be an area to look at. And again, the colored section is what is not served. The stuff that's in white is served, so we just made that a neutral color. If there's any gray, that meant there wasn't enough data to be able to accurately predict that particular spot. Again, same view of the county here, with the orange being the unserved and the white being served. This time we've got the middle mile, the dark blue again. And then all of these smaller lines, those are the unserved roads. That's every road that passes through a bit of territory that does not have good broadband. And the reason why we do that is that is really good shorthand for how much fiber you need. If you wanted to serve the whole county, you would need to put in 695 miles of fiber optic, because the poles typically follow the roads. Every now and then a utility corridor might branch off and go up over a ridge or something to get to the next holler over. But those are often being replaced. A lot of the utility companies now are just shifting to running their poles along the roads. So that's, when we do the budget, you'll see here in a second, we used that specifically to get our number for how much fiber would be needed. So if you were going to serve everything that's unserved in the county, ignoring any, like the South Central Power Grant, or any of the federal money that might have been awarded, you're looking at just over $60 million. You pick up 5,700 households. It's fairly low density, 8.3 households per fiber mile. So again, that's a density that you're not going to get a provider to come in without a subsidy. At that population density, we figure an internet provider would be willing to kick in about $1,700 per household of their own money to do this work. So that would be just under $10 million for the whole county. So that leaves a gap of $50.5 million to put in that 700 miles of fiber. So you need subsidy pushing almost $9,000 a household. And this is doable. And remember, these numbers are for that high quality fiber network with lots of capacity, good infrastructure that's gonna hold up for 40 years. You could cheap out, you could get by and install like real thin cables and just enough capacity to reach all the current households for cheaper than this. But we don't want to encourage that, because you then run into 10 years down the road, it's not enough anymore. So remember I mentioned some federal funding. Back in 2020, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, RDOF for short, our favorite acronym again. Two companies received the opportunity to get funding to do fiber to the home in the county. If you look at it, it looks like in most of the county. The light blue is a company called Connect Everyone. They also go by the name Starry, and they specialize in urban wireless. So they go into cities and they find a big building that doesn't have good service, and they put an antenna on top, and then they go over and find another location that does have good fiber into it, and then they beam internet into the top of that building, and then they distribute it inside the building through cables. They've never done rural fiber, and we have not heard of any movement from them in terms of claiming their money, so we're not sure they're gonna do that work. The dark blue is Mercury Wireless. They're also a wireless company, but they're claiming they're gonna do fiber to the home. They won just little patches, kind of like here in Harrison County, where they've just got certain spots where they got coverage. If you look at them at the whole state, they look the same, just dot, 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 with lots of gaps in between. That's really hard to build a fiber network when you've got territory like that, so we're not 100% sure they're gonna do the work either. Some of their funding apparently is coming up for approval, so maybe it will happen. But for the moment, the state is considering these tentative, and they're letting people apply for grant funding in there. That's why, like, they awarded, like, a lot of South Central Power's territory overlapped with this Connect Everyone stuff, and the state is fine with that because they're not convinced either that this work's going to happen. I'm not going to read you our methodology. It is available if you want to read about it, or I can go into that in more detail, but we did want people to provide plenty of details so people know how we got these maps. The state did accept this methodology. If you go to Broadband Ohio's website, the maps they have there are the ones that we developed. And they do accept them as evidence that an area needs funding. I do want to pause a moment here on the Broadband Opportunity Index. So here's all of the ratings for in order from most to least for what kind of demand you've got. So, you know, a lot of the professional services are the ones that have a lot of broadband need. And then when you get down into the middle, it's more like wholesalers, transportation operations. Lowest demand are things like farming, energy extraction, raw materials, contractors. Farming people always kind of look at me like, why do they need broadband in farming? Well, a lot of the equipment now is going automated. You got tractors that check in over the cloud to do their location when they're making their runs. You've also got on dairy farms, the milking equipment tends to be remotely managed. So you need reliable internet. You may not need as much as like a hospital, but you need good connectivity to be able to do that. We have more details, so I already went over the cost, but all of the assumptions on what the costs are, we have that included as well. I have a simplified version of that historical chart. That's really useful when you're making a case to a funding agency as to why you want to build a high quality network and one with extra capacity. People really seem to get this when we show it to them. And then finally, just the math on how we did the budget numbers. This is a good time, I feel, for broadband. Tom and I have been beating our heads against this problem for more years than we want to admit, and we both are optimistic about the way things stand now. We have a great agency in charge in Ohio. I'd love to see them be the poster child for the way broadband in rural America should be dealt with all across the country. They're doing things right. At this point, I'll be happy to take any questions, either online or from the room.
Is there any kind of solution to the immediate problem we have? We have good internet provided. And because of investors that didn't pay the bill or whatever, apparently it was shut down. And we are just dead in the water, and with no help from anybody and no ideas from anybody. It's just like, oh well.
And the equipment is already installed.
Everything's
we had
installed.
Really good service up until a week and a half ago, and it just went poof.
Gone.
Somebody
We
turned
have
the
the
switch.
towers, everything's plugged in. How do we get that turned back on?
That may require some advocating from like at the county level to see if you can get another provider to come in and take over.
Well, how do we do that? Who do we contact? We have a commissioner here.
This is gonna be a legal issue.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you're talking about a private company.
Right, private company.
Who developed the technology, put it in place, but their partner quit paying the bills because there wasn't a return or whatever the instance
Yeah.
is. And now they're gonna end up filing bankruptcy or suing each other, or who knows what. And so, I don't know that the county can do anything. It's a private matter.
Yeah, they may just have to play out.
I mean, if we could, we would, but
Cause there's no
So what do we do, use
What it
smoke
kind of,
signals?
it points out
public
how
utility
fragile our,
laws that protect us on any of that? I mean, that could get things rolling? I thought that's what we were here to discuss today.
So did I,
was
yeah, I
internet.
didn't realize.
This is long-term
well,
yeah.
this is where
pipe
we're
dream
at.
stuff, right?
We
That's
need
what we
immediate,
figure out
we need
how to
immediate
get
help.
money.
There's enough money out there now that I don't think it's a pipe dream anymore, but it is not gonna be able to be a short-term fix.
We're talking 2-3 years
You're
down
talking
the road.
2-3 years, yeah.
We need a short time.
And on our
Right
road,
now.
they don't even trim for the electricity, so there's no telling if we'll ever get it up.
Well, your experience kind of points out how even in places where there is coverage in our area, because there often is only one provider, you're at the mercy of that provider, and if they have a budget problem and decide to go out of business, or if they just decide that they're just not gonna provide good service because they can get away with it because nobody's competing, that's a reason, again, just like for this longer term stuff, like why it'll be good for the region to get.
But where
Do the
do we
Public
get
Utilities
help now?
Commission oversee any of these?
No, that's
I didn't
one of the
think so.
unfortunate thing, is broadband is Wild West. Like when
Yeah.
you're talking about electric service, if you're an
See,
electric
that's what I
provider.
mean, we can't go to the Public
Right.
Utilities Commission and say, hey, until these people can resolve their differences, flip the switch, turn them back on.
Right.
It's a public health and safety issue.
Well, and I didn't know, because with Public Utilities Commission, the federal government says, oh, this needs to be provided for everybody, but then they say, figure it out, we're just gonna tell you to do it,
Yeah.
But I didn't know if the Public Utilities Commission actually oversaw any of that at
No,
all, or they just
unfortunately,
tell you
no.
to go do something, and we'll sit back here and watch to see if you guys figure
Well,
it
we
out.
also have an unreliable landline telephone. I live by myself, okay, I'm 82 years old, I live by myself, I have the internet that just went down, and I have a very unreliable landline, which was actually dug up by some Amish people with a bulldozer next door this week. So I'm
So now
on
you're cut
Tramlet
off.
Road, in the middle of nowhere, I have absolutely no way to connect with anybody. If I didn't have good neighbors, I would be completely lost. I mean, I'm down to smoke signals now,
Yeah,
which is ridiculous.
and you are not alone. That's.
Well, that doesn't help
story-
me.
I mean, I know it doesn't help, but that story is, I've heard it so
We've
much.
got astronauts that talked to President Nixon 50-some years ago, and we can't figure out how to get a landline working now.
Yeah.
But can't the township or the commissioners or something do something?
Probably the best, it feels like the best bet right now is, like, it depends, I don't know what Harrison's situation is like with their ARPA funds, whether they're in a position even to be able to do these, like, try to get a wireless provider to come in and do new towers or something, or, cause some counties they just don't, the money's not available.
We are talking with Ohio Gig,
Uh-huh.
as one. Windstream is on the eastern part of the county. There are a few smaller ones, but Harrison County is only getting 2.9 million.
Okay, yeah, so that's a small fraction of what it would
That's
take.
not gonna do internet for Harrison County.
Right,
We need 50.
yeah. Now, for short term, it might be enough, you probably have competing, like many counties have competing priorities for how that money's gonna get spent, but like if you were to
Right.
put some of that up and do, like, put it as match toward like one of these ARC power grants, and then be able to get 4 or 5 million, that's enough with a wireless provider for them to be able to get at least some coverage.
We're looking at doing a revolving loan fund with part of it
Yeah, that's
to
another good
help with
approach.
that.
Yep.
So there is no answer.
Not right now. I mean,
Not instant.
it's not, unfortunately. But this is,
I know where the owners to the old company work, we can all go with pitchforks, it looks like we're pretty much down to that.
The torches
Oh,
of
It might be.
It's not
the next
funny.
to-
I mean, I have medical issues and
Yeah.
I can't.
I mean, we finally came into the next century just to have it ripped out from underneath us.
Mhm.
yeah.
I wish I had a good answer for you.
Well, I thought that's what we were gonna get today.
Yeah, I thought we were gonna get some kind of hope or some kind of help.
So how much did South Central get for this whole thing? For
There's a
Harrison
good
County?
company.
This
Yeah.
section for the Harrison Belmont area, for the East Territory, I think was 68 million maybe, for like a 3-county area.
Oh, for 3-county
Yeah.
area, and Belmont's more populated, so they'll get prioritized.
Well, so Central Power gives really good service.
Yeah,
They do,
I
they are,
can't say enough
we're
good
lucky
things.
about them.
Yeah,
That's who gives you your electricity?
Yeah,
Yes.
they're
Well,
they're one of
you're
the,
fortunate that
yeah,
they're further along than everybody else.
yeah, but.
And you were talking about the RDOF, Congressman Johnson called me 3 years ago, hey, you got $13 million or whatever.
Yeah.
Nothing's been
It's
done,
just, yeah, it's just.
nothing, and nothing will get done from what I'm being told.
Yeah.
Those companies are not gonna do anything.
And our,
That's
you
all
know,
we
we've
keep
got,
getting told, in Harrison County, you can't do this, you can't do that. Can't somebody stand up and do something?
yeah, because in Harrison County, I mean, we've got, what, over
Unreal.
60% of the county lives below the poverty level, so people in power
That's
don't
not
get.
true anymore.
It's not?
No.
Well, cool. So we're coming up in the
I
world,
mean, we
but,
moved
you
into
know,
Harrison County, invested in the property, worked hard for 22 years, and, you know, you pay all your taxes and I tried going to township meetings, that was a dead loss, now we're at.
It's private business and more government. I know, I feel for you, I know what you're saying, but we can't just wave a wand or write a check to a private business and have them perform.
no, I
Because
get-
then I'll
I get
have
that
10 other
part.
residents complaining that we gave them money and not somebody else.
Oh, no, I totally
Yeah.
understand,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's understandable, but.
And we've tried, we put up, through a Tiger grant, and we did a pilot program where we served 30-some people in the Deersville area with internet. It's not that we haven't done anything, it's just that
All
we're
the
limited in
facilities
what
are
we
there,
can
if we
do.
could just get somebody to stand up and do something.
Okay, eminent domain, let's go in and take the towers, I mean, there's gotta be, it's crazy when everything, you know, capitalism in a free society, the government says you have to do this, and then, you know, you've got the capitalists that don't want the regulation, they're trying to do a good job, and then they sweep the feet, we're all
I
at the
don't know
mercy
about
of the
that.
money.
I just think it's
We're at the
heartbreaking
mercy
to
of the
put
money.
your heart and soul into something and then you just get flattened.
Mhm.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I had a similar situation, as I was telling you earlier, we don't have, again, I live like 10 minutes from downtown Coshocton. We had no broadband access, the satellite internet we had access to, but it didn't work half the time and it was extremely expensive. There's no cell phone signal.
And we have no cell
and
phone
Vietnam.
signal either, that's another
Exactly, I know
thing.
exactly how you
You
feel,
know,
and
I
I had to
mean-
fight tooth and nail with AT&T to get a landline.
You think we could
They
at least get
told
a
me,
cell
"Well,
phone
just use your cell
tower?
phone." I'm like, you don't understand, we don't have cell phone service, so if I fall down my steps and break my ankle, and I can't call 911, basically.
Yeah, right, that's me, yeah.
So it is very, very frustrating, and I think that, what we've been trying to accomplish through this study has been to basically show the telcos companies and show the, FCC that the picture that they've been painting for years is very, very incorrect. And trying to show them that and kind of hold these telcos companies accountable. Am I right, Sean? Just to tell them, you know, hey, you've made this promise, you bid on these areas, you won them, you need to step up, as you said, and provide service to these folks. So it sounds like your situation is a little unique and particularly frustrating. I do feel for you guys on that. Is there anything, Commissioner, that perhaps Omega could help with in light of that, or anything that we could, it sounds like a
I
legal
wish
issue,
I
you
knew,
said?
I
More
mean,
legal
again,
thing.
it's a
Could we get
private.
a
think
cell
that-
phone tower put up for us? That would, so we could at least have cell phone service?
Technologically, you need somewhere for the data that goes through the cell phone tower to go.
Yeah.
So you gotta run some fiber out
Well,
there.
they've
where
got
the
one
tower's
over
gonna
in
be.
Deersville, and they've got, I mean, there's one,
We can get boosters, I'll talk to you after this meeting, we can get boosters because,
Can you just answer, you said there's equipment left, by this company?
They have.
Oh,
fiber
yes,
on
we
the
have
road.
all
This
the equipment.
company
Mhm.
just started a year ago.
Uh-huh.
Two, no,
2
no
years
more
ago.
than that,
It's been
because
2
I've had it
years.
for a year, and all the other
Yeah.
neighbors had it for 2
Okay.
years.
Which
And-
provider was this one?
Imperial.
This is
Networks.
Imperial Networks.
Imperial, okay.
So
But-
that's, whose is it then? It's just
It was,
five.
Private.
It's a privatized company.
It's not fiber.
No, it's not.
They're
no,
wireless.
it's some kind of
Yes,
fixed wireless.
signal,
Fixed
and it
wireless.
works
Oh,
beautifully.
okay.
Yeah.
We have 4 teenagers, 2 TVs.
So where they're
everything
located-
working on it.
They've got a tower,
As
less
crow
than a
flies,
mile?
yeah.
Yeah, less than a mile overall, yeah.
But
yeah,
that coverage off of that one tower, we've got 6 towers in Harrison County.
Mhm.
And that fixed wire was working for anybody and everybody that wanted it. I'm down in a holler,
Mhm.
Yeah,
and I've
me
got
too,
perfect
I'm in a
signal.
dead area.
She's in
Yeah.
a dead area. I
Can't
mean,
get cell phone.
So what caused them to shut this off was just like a legal matter that they are.
Yeah,
And
it's-
they're
the
fighting
one
amongst
investor didn't pay the
themselves.
bills.
Essentially, okay.
And he's got it all ready to go again, but the provider won't provide because the bills haven't been paid
So they're
by
in
the
arrears and
previous,
they
you
haven't.
know.
Okay, I see.
I mean, it's heartbreaking to see,
oh,
the
they had
guy
to
that
put
got
it in
it
the
going
nation.
is a really nice young man.
Is
He
he a
worked for
local?
years to get
Mhm.
this
Local
going.
fellow, okay.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Everybody involved was local.
So you guys have really been, busking to get it out here to yourselves since
And
telcos will
everything's,
provide it to you.
in our houses, we've got everything going. Somebody just has to turn the switch or whatever they do.
And that's usually, like, I found that's usually when you get the best services, when it's a small local company.
Yeah,
That they get things
Fantastic.
up quickly, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, this one, they have their issues with their investors. Yeah.
Yeah, they jumped through fire,
Is that gentleman still around the area who invested in it initially?
oh yeah, I'm gonna go talk to both of them. They're both friends of
The young man
mine.
that did all this, I mean, he's got a young family and everything, he's gotta go bankrupt. It's like, 6 or 7 years of his life invested in this, it just, we've got our problems, but, gee. Well, I really thought the commissioners could do something, I guess they can't.
I wish we could. I wish we could provide for a lot more than just Cranmont Road.
Josh, we have anything on, coming in
No.
online? All right.
Is there anything we can do? Is there anybody, I don't know how we contact them on the internet, but is there anybody to contact to get help?
As an individual, like,
My advice would be, has anyone other than the gentleman who invested tried reaching out to Imperial? And speaking with anyone there just to kind of explain the situation
No,
and
Imperial
do that?
has been pretty open,
Oh, yeah, they're very open, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
but the investor who was paying the bills
was in arrears of it.
obviously quit paying the bills.
Yeah, so then they shut it all, okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna get into that because then I'll be liable.
That makes sense. So basically what needs to happen is either those payments and those arrears need to be made, or a new investor needs to be sourced from somewhere. would be the
right.
solution.
And in the meantime, everything's in litigation,
Right.
which means years.
Exactly, and then that kind of leaves you guys in the lurch,
Right.
and it is a safety issue, I agree.
Yeah.
old-fashioned advocacy, if you know any reporters, start talking to them, try to get them interested in doing stories about it.
No, it's a lot
I know,
bigger
when
than
we
just a
first-
local company, because they tried to do what was right and personal differences turned it into a crap show. But it's a lot bigger than anything that we as local hillbillies tried to do. This is the federal government mandating that you do this, this, and this for your people, and then they tie your hands and won't let you do it.
Right.
So that's why, we can't shoot the messenger, because
No.
Paul, you come in here, you've got your hands tied because the state won't let you do this, this, or this, even though they tell you to do it. It's all a big joke when it comes to these rural communities.
Yeah,
Because
I
the
mean, we
state tells
wanted
you
to
you
work
have to
with
do
Larry on
something.
a pilot program, and because of the Marks towers, we can't
Mhm.
touch them.
Exactly, that's what I'm talking about. You're told you have to do this, and then, you have to answer to the state, the citizens,
Yeah.
and everybody's coming at you, and your hands are tied behind your back and your mouth is gagged with duct tape. So, you know, this is a lot bigger than anybody in Harrison County has the ability to fix. Because, let's face it, money talks and BS walks, and we don't have the money in Harrison County to get up there in people's faces financially and tell them to fix it.
I don't know who was providing the, I don't even know the correct technical term, backhaul or whatever to them, so that they could operate. I mean,
How many households?
I don't know how many households
We
there
were
are
up to almost
servicing.
10,000.
Or is this kind of
Dealing
more of a
with this?
special situation?
It just switched off last week.
Well, not 10,000 households.
People.
You know, like if this is locked up in
There's not-
investment
Well,
issue.
no,
There's not-
10,000 people.
Like bankruptcy
there's
proceedings
not-
until that.
Could have been
No,
10,000.
15 is the county.
Yeah, we've only
But it's
got
possible, like,
14.5 or so
14.5.
counties.
I thought we were up to
Another
16 and a
investor
half.
come in
No,
and
Oh,
say,
okay.
we'll take over
we
the
went down
business.
last census.
Oh,
He
okay.
had a
Source first.
Caddis, and we're in the Tappan area, and,
I don't know how many
he
customers.
had Adina, was it Adina?
He had thousands. Yeah, he had Adina, he had New Athens,
Yeah, he put up
Caddis,
several towers,
Piedmont, Deersville, everywhere.
yeah.
I don't know how many.
He had 6 towers up, so he was
I don't
servicing
know how many
everything
of
except
them
for
were-
Bowerston.
Were they all live?
Yeah,
Up until Monday of last week.
They were?
Mhm.
11 o'clock Monday on the 2nd.
Yeah.
So it's been 2 weeks now,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, ladies, I am not too sure at the present moment until the bankruptcy issue gets solved, if there's anything that we can do to help, but I am gonna give you one of my cards, and if there is anything that you ladies think of that we can do,
Is there a telephone number or something on there?
yes,
Okay.
there's a telephone number, yes,
Send us an
absolutely.
email.
And if my phone's working, I'll be able to call you.
Yes, I am.
This has to start at the state legislature.
I know that.
Well, you try call,
You guys do a great job, and
Talk to
it
the
sounds like
congressman,
everyone's
maybe
hands
they
are just
don't do
kind of
anything.
tied at this point with it, but that is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And are you with this Omega?
Yes, I am too.
Mhm.
Would you like mine as well?
Well, I didn't accomplish what we thought we were going to, but I'm
No,
glad,
but I've got some
glad I
answers for you as
came.
far as good. I'm heading up to Nashville